You must leave this house now.
I will protect my child.
The night I pushed my baby into this world, my mother-in-law opened the front door and told me to leave. Not tomorrow, not in the morning, that night, while I was still bleeding. And the most terrifying part, nobody in that house stopped her. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button and stay with me, because this story is going to shake something deep inside you. And I promise, it does not end where you think it ends. Her name was Esther, 24 years old, the kind of woman who walks into a room and every elder immediately calls her a good woman. She had the kind of quiet grace that made people trust her without knowing why. She was not loud, she was not dramatic. She kept her hands busy and her voice low. And she had learned, long before she married into the Obiora family, that in this part of southeastern Nigeria, a woman's worth was measured in how little trouble she caused. She married Clement on a dry Harmattan Tuesday in December. The celebration lasted 3 days. The whole village came. Women danced in matching wrappers, men drank palm wine from calabashes and argued about politics. Children ran between legs chasing goats that had escaped from their pens. It was the kind of wedding people talked about for seasons. Clement was everything a mother prays over. Tall, broad-shouldered, a civil engineer who had come back from Abuja to marry a woman from his hometown because, as he told his friends, he did not trust women from the city. He said it like a compliment. Esther chose to hear it that way. His mother, Mama Obiora, was another matter entirely. Her real name was Ngozi, but nobody called her that anymore. She had buried that name along with her husband 15 years ago, and since then, she had become simply Mama, the gravitational center of the Obiora compound, the woman whose approval determined everything from what was cooked for Sunday lunch to which relatives were allowed to visit during the festive season. From the very first day Esther moved into that compound after the wedding, she felt it. Not hostility exactly, something more calculated than hostility, something that watched, something that measured. Mama Obiora would smile at Esther across the kitchen while she cooked and say things like, "My son likes his soup with more crayfish," or "A real wife rises before the cockerel." And she would say these things with a smile so warm, so entirely maternal, that Esther could never be sure if she was being criticized or simply instructed. She told herself it was instruction. She told herself this was the normal initiation of a new wife. She had heard stories from other women. This was how it went. You endured. You proved yourself. Eventually, you were accepted. She cooked. She cleaned. She greeted every elder with both knees on the ground. She never spoke back. She sent money to Mama Obiora's relatives when they had difficulties, even when she and Clement were tight on their own budget. She attended every church meeting, every village women's gathering, every naming ceremony and burial that Mama Obiora said they must attend. She did all of this, and she watched Mama Obiora watch her, and she kept waiting for the moment when the older woman's eyes would soften. That moment never came. What came instead was the pregnancy. Esther discovered she was carrying a child 7 months after the wedding. She took the test alone in the bathroom on a Thursday morning, and when those 2 lines appeared, she pressed her hand over her mouth and sat down on the bathroom floor and cried, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming, terrifying relief of it. She had felt the pressure building around her for months, whispers at family gatherings, loaded questions about how things were going, an aunt who had pulled her aside at a cousin's birthday and asked with absolutely no shame whether she had seen a doctor yet, the kind of attention that made a young wife feel like her body was not her own, but a communal project with a deadline. She brought the test to Clement that evening, and he lifted her off the ground and laughed so hard the neighbors must have heard. He called his mother immediately, and in that phone call, She heard Mama Obiora's voice shift, just slightly, into something warmer, something that sounded almost like relief. She told herself, this is it. This is the thing that changes everything. She was wrong, but she would not understand how wrong for another 9 months. The pregnancy was not easy. Esther developed severe morning sickness that lasted well into her second trimester. She lost weight when she should have been gaining. The local clinic referred her to a specialist in Enugu, and she made that 2-hour journey every 3 weeks, sometimes alone because Clement's job kept him in Abuja for stretches of 2 and 3 weeks at a time. She managed. She always managed. But there were nights lying alone in that big compound bed with a ceiling fan cutting slowly through the humid air when she let herself feel the loneliness of it all. Mama Obiora lived in the adjacent building in the compound, close enough that their windows faced each other across a small courtyard. During the pregnancy, she began sending food, small pots of ofe onugbu, bowls of abacha garnished with garden egg, jars of zobo drink that she said was good for the blood. Esther ate all of it and felt, cautiously, that perhaps something was indeed shifting between them. She even went to Mama Obiora one afternoon and sat with her on the veranda and talked, really talked for the first time. Mama Obiora told her about her own pregnancies, about how she had lost a baby between Clement and her younger sister, about how she had wept for 40 days in her room and her husband had not known what to say. Her voice was different that afternoon, unguarded, human. Esther reached across and held the older woman's hand and thought, here it is. Here is the real woman underneath all that armor. She remembered that afternoon many times afterwards, replayed it, wondered how she had read it completely wrong. The due date was in October. Clement came back from Abuja 2 weeks early, specifically to be present, and Esther felt something close to perfect happiness settling over the compound in those early weeks of the month. He repainted the baby's room himself, refusing help, sweating through his shirt and arguing cheerfully with Esther about whether to use yellow or pale green. They chose pale green. He assembled a crib that came in a flat box from Jumia and cursed every instruction in it, and then stood back when it was done with the pride of a man who had built a cathedral. Mama Obiora came to inspect the room and nodded and said it would do. It was the closest thing to a compliment Esther had ever received from her, and she held it carefully, like a fragile thing. On the 14th of October at 2:30 in the morning, Esther's water broke. What followed was the longest night of Esther's life. Labor that started slow and then became something else entirely. Something primal and terrifying, her body doing things that felt beyond her control, the pain arriving in waves so enormous she could not find language for them. Clement held her hand through all of it. He was pale and frightened and trying very hard to hide it, which she loved him for. The nurse at the clinic in town, a short, no-nonsense woman named Sister Ebele, talked Esther through each contraction with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this thousands of times. At 4:47 in the morning, the baby came. A girl, small and furious and perfect, screaming her arrival into the world with a ferocity that made Sister Ebele laugh and say, "This one will give you trouble." Esther held her daughter against her chest and felt something rearrange itself permanently inside her. Not just love. Love is too small a word for what happens in that moment. It was more like the entire orientation of her existence simply changed direction. They named her Chisom. It means God is with me. She had no idea yet how much she would need that name to be true. They returned to the compound just after 6 in the morning. The sky was the pale gray pink of early dawn, and the compound was quiet. The kind of quiet that belongs only to the very early hours before the day begins. Esther walked slowly, still tender, still trembling slightly in her legs, while Clement carried Chisom wrapped in the hospital blanket. Mama Obiora was already awake. She was standing in the doorway of her building when they arrived, and something about the way she was standing, the stillness of it, The deliberate quality of it sent a small, cold premonition through Esther that she immediately dismissed as post-birth exhaustion. Mama Obiora came forward. She looked at the baby. She did not hold out her arms. She looked at the baby with an expression Esther could not read, not the joy she had expected, not the softness of a grandmother meeting her grandchild for the first time. Something careful, something assessing. "Let me see," she said, and she pulled back the edge of the hospital blanket and looked at the baby's face for a long moment. Then she looked at Clement. "Come inside," she said. "We need to talk." Esther assumed she meant all of them. She followed. But at the doorway of Mama Obiora's building, the older woman turned and said, flatly, "Not you." Esther stopped. "Mama," Clement started. "Not her," Mama Obiora repeated. There was no anger in her voice. There was something worse than anger. Certainty. The voice of someone who had already made a decision that they believed was completely justified. Clement looked at his wife. Something complicated moved across his face. Guilt, uncertainty, conflict. He handed Chisom carefully to Esther and went inside his mother's building and closed the door. Esther stood in a courtyard of her own compound at 6 in the morning, 9 hours after giving birth, holding her newborn daughter, listening to the sound of voices she could not make out clearly through the wall. She stood there for 20 minutes. When Clement came out, he would not look at her directly. He stood with his arms at his sides and spoke to a point somewhere near her left shoulder. "Mama says you have to go. Now, today. She says you cannot stay here." The world did a slow, tilting thing. "Clement," her voice was very quiet. She says the baby," he stopped. He tried again. "She says there are things she needs to tell me about you. She says she has been holding it, waiting for the right time, and now." "What things? What things about me?" He finally looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes was not anger. It was confusion, which was almost worse, because confusion meant he was listening. Confusion meant he did not immediately know it was a lie. "She says the child is not mine." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Esther had ever heard in her life. Now, pause here with me for just 1 second, because I need you to understand what is happening right now. This woman, who has given birth 9 hours ago, who has not slept, whose body is still in physical pain, whose body has just done the most extraordinary thing a human body can do, is standing in a courtyard being told by her husband that his mother claims the child she is holding is not his. And the husband, a grown man, an educated man, is not dismissing this. He is standing there with doubt on his face. If this story is hitting something in you right now, please subscribe, because I need you here for what is coming next, and I promise you this story is nowhere near finished. Esther did not scream. She did not cry. She looked at her husband for a long moment, with an expression that she would later describe as the moment she truly grew up. The moment she understood that love is not protection. Love can be dismantled. She went inside the main house. She packed a bag, not everything, just essentials. She packed Chisom's things. She changed her clothes with hands that shook only slightly. She took her phone, her documents, the envelope in the back of the wardrobe where she kept emergency money. She had learned, somewhere in the quiet architecture of her instincts, to always have emergency money. She came back into the courtyard with her baby and her bag. Clement was still standing there. He said, "You don't have to leave tonight. You can." "Your mother said tonight," Esther said, "so I will go tonight." She did not wait for him to change his mind. She was afraid that if she waited, if she let herself stand there long enough, she would start to beg. And begging was something she had promised herself she would never do. She walked out of that compound at 6:30 in the morning, carrying her newborn daughter and a single bag, and she did not look back. She went to her sister Obiageli's house. Obiageli, 27, unmarried, the kind of woman who handled a crisis the way a surgeon handles an emergency, opened the door,
took one look at her sister and pulled both of them inside without a word. It was only when Obiageli gently took Chisom from her arms and sat her down on the couch that Esther began to cry. And once she started, she could not stop. She cried until she had no voice left, until the crying became a kind of silent convulsion, until Obiageli put her hands on her face and said firmly, "Look at me, look at me. You are safe, you are here. This baby is here. That is what is real right now." Esther looked at her sister. "She said the baby is not his," she whispered. Obiageli's face did something then. It went very still, and then it went hard in a way that Esther had rarely seen from her gentle older sister. "Tell me everything," Obiageli said. "Tell me everything from the beginning." What Esther told her, piece by piece, over the next 2 days, built a picture that neither of them had been seeing clearly. It started with small things Esther had not thought to question because each thing alone seemed insignificant. The way Mama Obiora had, very early in the marriage, insisted on knowing Esther's cycle, framing it as concern, as a mother's care, wanting to help her daughter-in-law conceive. The way she had encouraged Esther to see a particular traditional healer in the neighboring village, a woman she trusted, she said, who would prepare something to help the pregnancy stay. Esther had refused that one. Something about it had not sat right with her. She had not thought much of the refusal at the time. But then, Obiageli, who worked at a private hospital in the city and knew things that most people did not know to look for, asked Esther one very specific question. The soup she was sending you during the pregnancy, the food, did she ever prepare it herself, or did she always send it through the house girl? Esther thought. "Always through the house girl," she said slowly. "And when you ate it, how did you feel afterward?" The memory surfaced like something underwater finally breaking through. The heaviness, the strange fog she had attributed to pregnancy fatigue. 2 episodes in the middle of the pregnancy where her baby's heartbeat had gone irregular and the specialist in Enugu was concerned, but then the reading stabilized and they had put it down to stress. She had put it down to stress. "Obiageli," Esther said, "what are you saying to me?" Her sister did not answer immediately. She stood and walked to the window and looked out for a long moment. "I am saying," she said, "that I think you need to have your blood tested, and I think you need a lawyer, and I think this story is much older than the night Mama Obiora sent you out." The blood test came back 3 days later. There had been elevated levels of a particular compound, something that could occur naturally, the doctor was careful to say, but that could also be introduced through repeated ingestion of certain herbal preparations, the kind of compound that in high enough doses could cause complications in pregnancy, could cause irregular fetal heartbeat, could cause a mother's body to, in certain circumstances, produce a child with slightly different visible features than expected, features that to an uninformed eye might raise questions about paternity. Let that sit for a moment. Mama Obiora had not simply insulted her daughter-in-law. She had over months carefully engineered the conditions under which that insult would be believed. She had been dosing Esther through the food. Obiageli had a friend who was a lawyer. His name was Chidi, and he was the kind of man who wore his intelligence quietly and thought 3 moves ahead of everyone in the room. He listened to everything, the blood test results, the timeline, the testimony from the house girl who, once spoken to privately and promised she would not lose her job, admitted she had sometimes been given additions by Mama Obiora to put in the soup before sending it across. The house girl's name was Nkiru. She was 16 years old. She said she thought it was vitamins. Chidi looked at the totality of it and said carefully, "This is deliberate, this is planned, and I think it has been planned for a long time. The question is, why?" That was the question. Why would a woman work so hard to destroy a marriage that had, by all outward appearances, been her own doing? She had chosen Esther for her son. She had been present at every stage of the courtship. She had presided over the wedding with visible pride. Why? Chidi said, "Let me look at something." He came back 4 days later with information that restructured the entire story.
Clement's father, the late Obiora Sr., had died 15 years ago and left a will. In that will, the family land and the majority of the family assets were held in trust and were to pass to Clement and his children. But there was a clause that Mama Obiora had apparently known about and had kept to herself, that stated that if Clement's first child was a daughter, a portion of that inheritance was to pass to a particular set of relatives on the father's side, a branch of the family that Mama Obiora had been in bitter conflict with since before her husband's death. Chisom was a daughter. By being born, by existing, this tiny girl had triggered a legal mechanism that would route money and land away from Mama Obiora's direct control and toward people she despised. It was never about whether the child was Clement. It was about making sure that even if the child was Clement, there would be enough doubt, enough rumor, enough whisper to contest the will, to claim the child was illegitimate, to keep the inheritance locked or redirect it entirely. She had not acted in a fury of the moment. She had planned this over months, with patience, with food. Clement received this information through Chidi on a Wednesday afternoon. Esther did not go to that meeting. She had decided, through the quiet, unshakable clarity that had come to her in the days since leaving the compound, that she would not be present for her husband's reckoning with the truth. He had chosen, in the most critical moment of her life, to stand with confusion rather than with her. She would give him the truth, because the truth was his right, but she would not watch his face while he received it. He had her later from Obiageli, who had gone with Chidi, that Clement had sat completely still for a very long time after reading the documents, that he had asked 2 questions, that he had then put his face in his hands. He called Esther that night at 9:30. She let it ring. He called again. She answered on the 4th call. He said her name once, Esther, and then stopped. And the silence on the phone line carried everything he could not find words for. The shame of it, the stupidity, the magnitude of what he had allowed to happen. She said, "Your daughter is well. She is gaining weight. She looks like you." He had him make a sound, just once, the kind of sound a man makes when something inside him breaks that he did not know could break. She said, "I need time." She ended the call. What happened to Mama Obiora is something this village talked about for years afterwards, and not just because of the legal consequences, though those were real and they were serious. The documentation that Chidi assembled was thorough enough that criminal proceedings were initiated. The house girl in Kiru provided a formal statement, the blood test results were documented, 2 other relatives came forward quietly with their own stories about Mama Obiora and her long habit of manipulation. But what people talked about more than the legal proceedings was what happened at the family meeting. In Igbo culture, some matters are handled not just in courts, but in the presence of family, elders, relatives, people who have known you your whole life and whose witness carries its own weight. There was such a meeting, held in the main house of the compound on a Saturday morning. Every living elder of the Obiora family was present. Mama Obiora sat in the center of it, and everything was placed before her. She did not confess immediately. She deflected. She reframed. She appealed to the history of the conflict with the other branch of the family, painting it as a war she had been fighting alone since her husband died, a war in which she was the only one willing to protect what was theirs. A elder, a man who had known her husband, who had sat at that original will reading 15 years ago, stood up and said, "Ngozi,
You fed your daughter-in-law medicine to harm her pregnancy. You sent a new mother into the road at dawn with a newborn child. You accused her of the one thing a woman in this culture cannot easily recover from. And you did all of this not because of who she did, but because of who her daughter is and what her daughter's existence means for money you want to control. This is what you are telling us. The compound went completely quiet. And Mama Obiora, this woman who had moved through the world for 15 years as an unassailable authority, who had never once needed to lower her voice to make people obey, looked at the faces arranged around her and found no ally in any of them. She began to cry. And then, because she was still herself, even in that moment, she turned the crying into an appeal. Her health, her age, the loneliness of widowhood, she had only been trying to protect what her husband built. The elder sat back down. He said quietly, "Ngozi, protect it from whom, Ngozi? From his own grandchild?" No one answered, because there was no answer.
Esther did not attend that meeting. She was at Obiageli's house, nursing Chisom in the early afternoon light that came through the window while the meeting happened without her. She did not need to be there. She had said everything she needed to say through Chidi and through the documents and through the simple, devastating fact of her own blood test. She had said it quietly, without dramatics, without the kind of public fury that would have been entirely justified, but that she knew would be used to diminish her. Her cousin called afterward and told her what had happened, how it ended, what the elders decided. She listened. She said thank you. She put the phone down and looked at her daughter's face for a long time. Chisom was awake, staring up at her with the focused, slightly baffled expression of a newborn encountering the world. Her small fist was closed around her finger. "We are okay," Esther told her. "We are actually okay." Clement came to Obiageli's house on a Thursday. He called first and Esther said he could come. He arrived with nothing, no gifts, no grand gestures, just himself, looking like a man who had not been sleeping, which was true. He sat across from her. He looked at his daughter for a long time. Then he said, "I should have walked out of that building with you." Esther said nothing. He said, "There is no excuse. I know there is no excuse. She is my mother, but she is my mother, and even if she had said something that was true, which it was not, you had just given birth, I should have walked out with you." Esther said yes. He said, "I am asking you." Esther said, "I know what you are asking me, and I do not have an answer yet." He nodded. He had prepared himself for this, or he had tried to. "Can I hold her?" he asked. Esther looked at him. Then she picked up Chisom and placed her carefully in her father's arms. Clement held his daughter and looked down at her face, the face that looked so much like his that Esther had always marveled at it, and his expression moved through several things at once. Love was the biggest of them. Grief was underneath it. Shame was underneath that. He said very quietly, "Hi, Chisom." The baby looked at him with her unfocused, ancient-seeming gaze. "God is with me," Esther said. He looked up. "That's what her name means," she said. "I named her that the night she was born, before any of this happened, before I knew any of this was coming." She paused. "God is with me." He understood what she was telling him. The road back was not straight. Esther did not return to the compound for 4 months. Clement moved partially between the compound and Obiageli's, which was its own awkward arrangement that tested everyone's patience. The legal proceedings against Mama Obiara moved slowly in the way that legal proceedings in Nigeria move slowly, but they moved. The clause in the will was examined and ultimately upheld. The inheritance passed as Obiara Sr. had written it. Mama Obiara moved to live with her daughter in another city. She left the compound without ceremony, which was its own kind of sentence, because ceremony and witnesses and acknowledgement was what she had always craved, and she left with none of it. Esther moved back in February on her own terms, after Clement had agreed to every condition she named: couples counseling, a separate house eventually, her name on the property documents, and most importantly, her absolute right to determine who had access to her daughter and under what circumstances. He agreed, not because she had leverage, but because he understood, finally, that these were not demands. They were the minimum requirements for what it means to actually protect your wife. The story Esther tells now, when she tells it, and she does tell it, because she believes that silence is how these things survive, does not have a clean, satisfying ending. Her marriage is a work in progress. Trust is a thing that was broken and is being rebuilt slowly, the way anything serious is rebuilt, one careful day at a time. She does not know if she will ever fully forgive Clement for that morning. She is not sure forgiveness is even the right frame for it. What she knows is that she is still here, that Chisom is thriving, that the compound when she returned to it felt different, not because it had changed, but because she had. She is the one who makes the decisions now. Not loudly, not with the punishing authority of a woman who won a battle. Quietly, the way water moves, around and around every obstacle, patient and relentless, always finding the way through. The elder who had spoken at the family meeting stopped her once in the market, months later, and said, "You handled yourself well, Noa. You did not destroy the family. You let the truth do it for you." She had thought about that for a long time. The truth does not need your help. That is what she had understood in those early days at Obiageli's house, nursing her daughter and waiting. You do not need to scream it or perform it or defend it. You just need to stay quiet and let it surface. Truth always surfaces. The woman who walked out of that compound at 6:30 in the morning, tender and bleeding, and carrying everything that mattered to her in one bag and one pair of arms, she is still Esther. But she is also something more now, something that had to be broken open to exist. She named her daughter Chisom because in the worst moment of her life, she believed God was with her. Looking back, she thinks she was right.
Chisom turned 1 in October. They had a naming ceremony, a proper one, the kind that had been denied to her at birth by everything that had happened. The compound was full. Women danced. Children chased each other through the legs of the adults. The elders came and held the baby and blessed her with words that had been said over children in this community for generations. Esther watched her daughter be welcomed into the world the way she should have been welcomed from the beginning. And she stood in the middle of all of it and felt something quiet and enormous that she did not have a name for. Obiageli came to stand beside her. She handed her a cup of zobo, made in Obiageli's own kitchen, by hands they both trusted, and clinked her cup against it. "To Chisom," Obiageli said. "To Chisom," Esther agreed. The baby, in the arms of an elder, reached out her small fist toward the light coming through the compound gate, that wide, generous afternoon light that falls on everything equally, on the beautiful and the broken and the healed and the still healing. And she opened her fingers. Just open them, the way babies do when they are discovering that their hands belong to them. Esther watched and thought, yes, that is exactly it. Open your hands, stay alive, let the truth come up on its own. The rest will follow. Thank you for staying with me through this entire story. If this moved you, if you saw something in Esther's strength, in the quiet way she carried herself through the worst night of her life and came out the other side still standing, then please subscribe. Hit that bell, because every week I bring you stories like this one. Real, layered, human. The kind of stories that stay with you long after you close the tab. Chisom means God is with me. And sometimes, in the very worst moments, that is the only thing that is true, but it is enough. See you in the next one.